Not that we've ever done that before. Not that I've ever forgotten to do it. But now we have the music going. We'll go. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to the people around the world. This is Martin Hubel, your host of the DB2 Night Show, and today is our 113th show on DB2 on ZOS. And my special guest today is Roy Boxwell of Segas Inc., or Software Engineering Group, if you prefer. How are you doing today, Roy?
Yeah, I'm doing very well, thanks, Martin. I love being at work at 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon.
At 5 o'clock on a Friday, yeah. Well, we have the rest of the day to look forward to. We've got some snow on the ground. Our temperatures are the lowest they've been all winter. We're in around -8, which is, yeah, not a lot of fun. We've been there, but we actually escaped through January pretty nicely. Our temperatures were normally around somewhere between -1 and +5. So it was a pretty, we got off easy in January, but we still have February and March to get through, so we'll have to see how we do there. So let me run through the slide deck here and get the housekeeping out of the way. Once again, watch for us on Twitter. We have a hashtag of DB2 Night, and we promote the show there. We also have a very good-looking audience this week, because when we have vendors on who do also have Twitter and other ways of getting the word out, we often end up with a very good-looking, good-sized audience. So we've got a lot of people signed up today. Our LinkedIn group is there as well, and we also, as we've announced for the last little while, our replays are now on YouTube, in addition to being downloadable in Windows and MP4 format. And of course, Roy, being the great guy he is, he's made his handout available, and that will be available on our replay blog as well. So I already have that, so I'm going to try to get all of the post-processing done today. I always tell people that. Today is the day I do it. I did it last time, too. I was really a good boy. And here's our disclaimer, copyright 2021 of DBI. Things are being recorded, be nice. We have trademarks, and they belong to the people that own them. And we're respectful of their trademarks. And here's our announcements. The next show coming up is Michael Tiefenbacher, another person from Germany. Will be speaking on recursion on February 12th. That's in 2 weeks. And I've seen this presentation, and I will not mind seeing it again, because he does a really good job. So if you've ever considered recursive SQL, you'll want to see that presentation. We also have a couple of people from the IBM marketing organization. One of the things I continue to want IBM to do is get the word out on just how great DB2 LUW is. So I've been invited some people from that organization to speak in both March and May. They were to have sent me their titles today, but I do have their names. So that's at least a start, and we know they're coming. Our next month's show on DB2 on Z is our old friend, good old friend, young friend, Cheryl Larson, that will be talking about tuning SQL that still works. And of course, if you've heard Cheryl speak, you know she will do a great job on that. And following that, we have Dave Belkey. I was going to put Dave Belkey's like myself. He has his own company. I think I probably should have filled that in with Pragmatic Solutions. That's one of the names he used to use for his company. And he's going to be talking about DB2 Java performance best practices. And that'll be a great presentation. As always, our founding host of the DB2 Night Show is DBI. And they will be, you can, if you like, watch their demo. If you do, you get I believe it's a Starbucks gift card, and just follow that link, and you can get the full Monty on what goes on with the DBI software. It's worth doing. Our winner from last month is Barry Lewis of AAA Texas. I was looking at it. We've got an awful lot of people that watch this show from various AAAs, from Southern California to Texas to Missouri, and a lot of these are, many of them are good old friends as well that have worked other places but have moved on to work at AAAs, and that's a great thing. And our sponsors, as always, our DBI, our founding sponsor, and yours truly, your host, Martin Hubel, and there's my logo. And by the way, the next thing I want to show Roy, I like to put in some comic relief from time to time in the show.
Uh-oh.
Oh, yeah, but this one's on me. I went through, and my cousin, we have an annual family reunion, and we used to have them a lot more when our parents were alive, but of course all my aunts and uncles, if they were alive, would be in and around the 100-year mark. My dad turned 100. His birthday, it was his 100th anniversary of his birth was last year. My mother will have reached 100 if she had still lived. She lived till 94. But my cousin came across a family photo of me. And this is such a great photo. And there's questions that I can't not answer about it. But here's my mom and dad, my brother with his wife at the time, and you got me sitting on the floor with a haircut that was very quickly shorn off after this, because right after this picture, I ended up joining the Army Reserve, and that haircut is not regulation. And for some reason, in a family photo, I'm holding a trombone. So I must have been doing a demo, because I believe that was a rental from the school. They rented me a wonderful trombone to play in a musical. I believe that was the year we did Guys and Dolls. And I was really proud of that trombone. It wasn't even mine. It was only rented for a month or two. And in the background here is a euphonium that I also played in school. So I must have been doing show and tell with my horns when my cousin Tony came by and took our pictures. So there you have it. I figured if I showed it to you first, it wouldn't show up later in the National Enquirer. Everyone has seen this already. But I just thought there's various questions as to why a 17-year-old would be sitting on the floor holding a trombone. There you have it. And I know that guy. I used to anyway. And you notice the TV, and this is an old FM radio, etc., all in the basement of my parents' house, with great paneling and rugs on a cement floor. Those are the days. All right, now we're into our studio audience polls here. So let's get everybody else a chance to move their mouse, and we'll launch our first quiz, our first question here, which is, what's the newest DB2 version do you have? And you have various responses you can make there. I've changed this and updated it now to include more versions or more selection around DB2 version 12, and anybody running version 11 or earlier, I put you down in another category there. Noting that is at the end of April that support for DB2 version 11 will be dropped. So if you're not off DB2 11, you're going to lose support unless you want to pay for it. So I would encourage you to get your organization all on to version 12 soon. And of course, this is a presentation on deprecating releases, so that's another reason for sharing this information with you. We see that we've got a quarter of our audience roughly on the latest and greatest, about 50% or over 50% on the base level version 12, and a few people lagging behind there. And we'll move on and do the next poll. We've got a few here to do. And this is one I'm asked for multiple reasons, but I really wanted the primary reason, and you're only allowed to select one answer here. So if you could, just choose the answer that best fits what you're trying to do here. Is to stay within support, to get support for bugs and other perhaps security issues, or to exploit new features. And I think this is kind of a cool one. It's always good to see what people are doing. And in here, we've got 80% of our audience roughly has voted, so we'll close that off and share it. And we have over half the audience is to stay current with IBM support. And then we have fixed bugs and security issues. and or to exploit new features. We got that. All right, the next one we've got. When you're doing upgrades, do you check for deprecated features? And on these yes, no, I've expanded them to also include I don't know, in case people are really in the job of doing the release planning themselves.
Or, of course, they haven't watched this presentation yet.
Exactly. And believe me, there are going to be some surprises in here. I've got a comment I'll make later on as we go through with one of my friends who's dealing with deprecation right now with a thing that they do with dropping in, creating table spaces during a batch process, and how that is gonna affect them when they're not universal table spaces.
Mm-hmm.
Life will get interesting as they get to about 505, I think, is where it gets interesting for them.
Yep.
And here we are. Let's close that off, and we'll share that. Are you concerned about deprecated features? And the audience are viewing the results. 77% are, 19% are not. Moving along. And do you correct any of the deprecated features to have them work when you run across them, or do you try to find a way to coexist when you hit them? I guess is the nature of this question.
Yep. Or is it just stuffing your head in the sand?
Yes, and sometimes you'll have ostrich friends in there. You can go out in a field and find other heads in there. It's in its own little way. Sounds a little strange, but we live in strange times, don't we?
Yeah.
Okay, let's. We've got everybody viewing that. We're seeing that 86% of our audience would correct them if they find them. And with that, that's the end of our polling questions. So I'm going to move ahead now. And there's another, the main screen for DBI Software's Brother Panther product, which shows an awful lot of great information. When you get around to moving some things off the mainframe onto DB2 LUW, you might want to consider this product. It's very useful and saves an awful lot of time. It provides good management information. And with that, Roy, I'm ready to turn it over to you, and I'm going to make you the presenter.
Okay.
And you should have that little clicky thing on your thing. I see, I'm seeing your screen right now, so we're all good to go. As always, I will mute the. I'll mute my microphone, but I'll stay on and watch for the question and answer tool, and I'll break in at the appropriate times. But you're on your own, and I'll when I see a question, I'll bring it in. With this size audience, we should have some.
Would be nice. Okay, thank you very much, Martin. Thank you for asking me to be on the show. It's always a pleasure. This is all about mitigating migration mayhem, MMM. The problem, of course, these days is we are living in an extremely agile world. Things are changing faster than we can normally worry or care about. Things get changed which you didn't know they were going to be changed, and then maybe a year, 2, 3 years later, you suddenly find out that changed, and no one told you. No one can stay on top of all the changes going on all the time, not just within DB2, but within their own applications. These days, it's absolutely impossible. You can't possibly do it. And so this presentation is all about the special part that you can do a little bit about, which is the deprecated world. What am I going to do this evening or this afternoon? What does deprecated mean? There is a bit of discussion. There's been a few listserv posts over the years. What exactly does deprecated mean? Then why should you care? Yeah? It could be, I don't care about this. Yeah, if it's working, it's working. And then, of course, the big question, how do you find them all? They are documented. but sometimes it's a bit like Douglas Adams wrote, it's in the bottom drawer of a locked filing cabinet in the locked cellar with a sign in front of it saying, beware of the alligators. It's not that easy to dig them all out. Once you've found all of the deprecated features, then of course you have to make the decision, are you going to fix them? Or are you just going to say, not my problem. I'm retiring in 5 years. I'll let the younger generation fix all these problems. And then finally, we're going to do questions and answers. Hopefully there'll be a few, as Martin mentioned. So rolling straight in, what exactly does deprecated mean? What does it mean? This is from the dictionary, deprecate, to express disapproval of, which as an English person living in Germany, I would never, ever, ever use deprecated this way. This is from an American dictionary. So I've never heard anyone ever say, what I deprecate is persistent indulgence. I've never heard anyone use it like this. Depreciate, on the other hand, is a word that we use and we hear a lot, to diminish in value over a period of time. So when you buy a house or you buy a car, you are aware that its value will depreciate over time. This is something we're all aware of. And another meaning is to disparage or belittle something, which again, I've never used. It's a meaning I didn't know. Yeah? And so the question is, what on earth are IBM using this word for? Yeah? As you can see, the IBM world is a little bit weird. What they've done is they've created a hybrid meaning of deprecate, which is actually another term for depreciate, but in the first sense. So we're starting off with really confusing stuff here. You could, of course, argue that this is typical IBM behavior. My favorite, of course, is sys-IBM sys-indexes. When I first started with DB2 back in 1986, this irritated me. These days it doesn't. I don't care that it's sys-indexes, but in 1986, this actually caused me major irritation. And I did actually complain to a couple of IBM site engineers at that time, and one of them was actually John Campbell. But none of them, of course, agreed to change it to the Latin plural. Hope is still there that one day it will get the correct name, but I don't think that will be happening anytime soon. But what it's all boiling down to is deprecated is a term that IBM invented, which means an item, object, code, whatever it is no longer going to be updated and will, but at some unknown point in the future, possibly, just might, disappear and stop working. Now, this is so foggy, it's like nailing something to a tree. It's very difficult to find out what they're meaning. What they're basically saying is they have a code path which they no longer want to care about. That's basically what deprecated means. Looking at it from the application programming point of view, you deprecate a feature and you can then happily say to your end users, you shouldn't be using that, it's deprecated. If you find a bug in it, not our problem, it's deprecated. It's a nice thing to use, I must be honest. As a vendor, we also use the word deprecated with our software as well. So now we know what deprecated means. And here we have the little Android and his asynchronous tasks, which were also deprecated. He's at the funeral there. Why should we care as DBAs about deprecated features? Now, of course, it's a very good question. I was very happy to see that a lot of you do check for deprecated features, and a lot of you do correct your deprecated features. The thing is, and here's the first of probably many Monty Python points tonight, they're all basically like dead parrots. Yeah, the dead parrot is nailed to its perch and is not causing a problem. Everything's fine. Your Norwegian blue is there, happily dead, but nailed to its perch. But of course, at some point, just like when the parrot will start smelling, it's going to change. And at some point, that deprecated item will really disappear. And then, as I mentioned here, it could be like a synonym. They've been deprecated for years, but they still work. However, one day, IBM will remove them. And if your programs are reliant upon a synonym being there, they will just stop working, which of course is not good. Yeah? And so another reason, making your DB2 catalog, I say here modern. Now the reason for that is we're a third-party software vending firm. We sell software that generates utilities and stuff for reorgs and run snaps and all that sort of stuff. One of the problems that it has, or we have, is that there's still lots of table spaces out there which are defined as large, and most of them, of course, have their 0 in the DS size column. Now this is okay, as long as you're aware of it. You can put, I wrote a nice little case which goes on the DS size to work out, depending on the type of object, the page size, the number of defined partitions and everything else, what the actual DS size would really be if the DS size was there. Now I've written this as a case and it all works fine. But of course there's software out there which doesn't have this. And so that software is assuming that your DS size is going to be filled with a valid value, when in fact it could be on some of your spaces 0, which of course is not good. And these things tend to happen around about 3 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday, traditionally. And there's still a lot of people out there, far more than I thought, who are using classic index-based partitioning. Now, in classic index-based partitioning is a non-segmented space using a partitioning index as the partitioning schema. This is, old school. Yeah? You should be at least heading towards table-based partitioning so that classic index-based partitioning is gone, but even the classic table-based partitioning is not the way of the future. All of these things, you have to start thinking about saying, okay, they're going to cause me grief. They might not really be deprecated, but they shouldn't really be there. Yeah, so you want to start looking at these things and working out some sort of plan to say, how are we going to go forward? How are we going to fix all these things? Now, thankfully, for a lot of these items, you're being forced down this road anyway, because of the RBA change, which I'll get to later in the presentation. So, how now do you find your deprecated items? Where are they? How do you find them? Now we're going to start looking in DB2 internals. Now, the first thing is, with DB2.10, IBM actually introduced a brand new chapter in the What's New book. Now, I know most people don't have time to read the What's New book, but actually it does contain all the data you need. And there's a chapter in there called Deprecated Function in DB2 blah, blah, blah. And in there, there's this little statement, which I won't bother reading, you can read it yourself. But basically, this is what IBM says, don't use these features. Yeah, and the real one there is avoid creating new dependencies that rely on deprecated function. Yeah, that's giving you a nice warning. And then the bit I love, and develop plans to remove any dependencies on such function. Okay? Did you all develop plans? Yeah, I bet you did. No one, of course, developed plans. We have too much stuff going on to develop plans. But I must admit, the chapter is a very good starting point for looking for all these deprecated items. The very first item, and I kid you not, it's over 7 pages of data, is the 6-byte RBA and LRSN. If you're running non-data sharing, you have RBAs. If you're running data sharing, you have the LRSNs, of course. Now, the 6-byte feature has gone. Support has been removed on the right-hand side column there in DB2.12. You've got to go to a 10-byte RBA LRSN for all sorts of various functions. You should definitely have done with DB2.11, the BSDS must have been converted to 10-byte. You must complete this conversion before going to DB2.12, and the user objects, they all say in the documentation, yeah, you don't have to do them all in one go. You don't have to reorganize the world. You can leave it. You can leave it as long as you're not running out. If you're running out of RBAs or you have large LRSN differences, you still have to get those objects reorged to move them from 6 to 10-byte RBA LRSNs. This is one of the things which quite shocked me, that so many customers have still got lots of 6-byte RBA and LRSN stuff lying around. Yeah? Most of the other pages in that first chapter are just ZPalm subsystem parameters which are changed during migration, so you don't have to worry about them, or they're never used and have just been dropped, and so you can just basically ignore the other pages. But there were a few other ones which were important. One is BRF, deprecated. BRF, remember, basic row format. That was how things used to be stored before the new way, RRF, reorganized row format, came out. Now remember, the only difference between the two is the positioning of the varchar characters. So the varchars don't sit in the middle of your data rows anymore. There's just an offset, which is also still 2 bytes, which points at the end of the row to where your varchar is. This meant that your logging should normally reduce, because of course, remember how logging works? It takes the first change byte to the end of the record. And so if you have varchars in the middle of your record, and that length changes from Roy to Roy Boy, You log from that length byte, which has changed, right to the very end of the record, which could be a lot of wasteful logging. So the plan was always, for performance reasons, for logging, put the varchar stuff at the end, put the most changed data towards the end. And of course, that's fine when you're designing an application in a database. Everything's fine when you're there in Irwin or whatever tool you're using and you're defining stuff. But a week after that product has got into production, you've got your first alters. And so you're adding columns because you don't want to drop and recreate. No one likes to drop and recreate in production. And so you're altering, adding columns, adding columns, adding columns. And so your wonderful table design of having everything correctly done is then gone. Yeah? And of course, BRF solves that. Yeah? Sorry, RRF solves that. And BRF is actually gone in DB212. You can only work with RRF from that point on. Simple table spaces, remember them? They were so sweet, weren't they? Oh, I used to love simple table spaces. You got to migrate to a PBG, a segmented space, if you can, or a PBR. Yeah? And of course, support has been removed for some simple table spaces from DB212 FL level 504. Yeah? So at that point, and you can't even create a simple table space anymore for recovery. So you've got simple table spaces have a real problem. If you've got any of them now, you've really got to move quickly to get rid of them. Synonyms, we've mentioned here again, they have here migrate to alias. We'll go into details about that. Support has not been removed for synonyms, still nailed to their perch. Then along came DB211, and DB211 only actually added 3 things to the entire list of deprecated items. Number 1 is hash tables, and the recommended alternative, drop it. Okay, that's also gone in 504. Then the one which shocked a few people, I must admit, non-UTS-based table spaces. So that's all your simple and segmented and classic and index-based classic partition tables are gone. They are deprecated. You have to migrate to PBG or PBR. Again, FL504 for that one to be removed. And a little one, which still is a bit of a surprise and catches people out, Sql External Procedures have also been deprecated in version 11. It's documented in there, and what they say is you've got to go to native. We'll go into a little bit of details about that later on in the presentation. And then when DB212 came out, it didn't actually bring any deprecated items. None. Yeah, which I thought was quite cool, really. But of course, you have to remember the FL504 is the watershed. We've mentioned this a bit today. There's been some chapter on listserv today about this as well. The problem with the FL504 is it stops you creating these objects. It's not actually as bad as everyone says it is. You can just down level yourself. And we'll go into that a bit later, how you can go down level and create these deprecated items again. But why stop there? Why stop with just the deprecated items that IBM lists? There's always a few things in the catalog which just sort of annoy me. Empty databases. There's so many empty databases lying around there. The classic is share level change reorg database, which people just forget and it just sits there. Depending on how you set up your reorgs, the implicit databases can indeed just stay there, which is a bit of a mess. Those, of course, are the next point as well, the empty implicit databases. Lots of people, they just save table as Fred. They forget that table Fred has just created a table space and a database. When you drop table Fred, the table space is gone, but the database doesn't. The database stays there. And so one of your DB IDs has gone, and there aren't that many. You can actually run out if you're not clever. Then empty table spaces. Classic cases, people have moved the table, they've dropped the table and just forgotten to clean up. And you could still be image copying them. It's quite funny. Then we have multi-table table spaces. Now this is interesting because of course these are going to be banned, obviously. If you think about it, if you can't have simple or segmented spaces, they are the only 2 flavors of table space that allow multiple tables in a single space. Yeah, so we are heading towards single table spaces, kicking and screaming. I know lots of people who use QMF who absolutely hate this idea because they have 5,000 tables in one table space. But we've got to go down this path. This is what has been told to us by DB2 development, and we're going down that way. And there will become a time when it's not just that you can't create these objects anymore, you probably won't be able to even use them anymore. And what's also interesting, if you have multi-table table spaces, how many tables do you actually have? Because that has a knock-on effect with your DS max. If you think about it, at the moment, if you have 5,000 tables in one table space, you have one vSAM linear data set that's open. If they've been pushed out into 5,000 vSAM linear data sets, and your user is looking at 600 of them, that's another 600 open data sets that your DS max has to handle. Yeah, you have to think about these things. And last on the list is what I mentioned on the earlier slide, the DS size 0 objects. Yeah, I hate them personally, and I try and reorganize them out all the time to actually get them to a modern, so that the DS size is not 0. Yeah, so with this big list of stuff, armed with a few SQLs, we can then happily trawl through your DB2 catalog and get a list of all of the bad guys we've just been discussing. And so now we're just going to run through. I won't go into detail with all the SQLs. You'll be able to cut and paste them from the PDF that I've sent to Martin. But basically, this is just a list of all the empty databases. Yeah? And so what's important on this is you're not interested in work databases. And you just want to find anything where there is no table space in it. And then empty implicit databases, just where the implicit column is set to yes and there's nothing. Yeah, these are definitely, these ones you can probably drop without even thinking about it. Yeah, the other ones you might have to actually check. They might be being used, but these ones you can almost certainly just get rid of them. Empty table spaces where the tables is 0 and it's not a DB type work or anything. Because obviously you don't want to drop your work tables. And then hash organized spaces. Yeah? If the organization type is H, that tells you you've got a hash. At this point, I can tell you I've never, ever seen a hash table at any customer site I've been to. I would love to be proved wrong, but I haven't seen anyone who's actually used them. Then we have classic index-based partitioning tables. How do you find these guys? Well, obviously, you've got to make sure you're looking for partition spaces. That's why the TS partitions is larger than 0. And what's important is that not TP-IX creator is nothing. In other words, it's got to have a table partition index creator. If that's the case, it's an index-based classical, because the TS seg size is 0 based object. And these you've really, really got to think about migrating. And then the table-based. The only difference in the queries is here the TP-IX creator is now not. Yeah, that's the only difference between the two queries. Yeah, go up, go down, you can see that's the only difference between the two. Segmented or simple table spaces. This is where, again, your partitions is 0 and the TS type is blank. Yeah, that's how you find out what you've got. And what's important here is I only want to see where the number of tables is 1. Yeah, and we'll get down to why later. Yeah, but I think it's very important to find the ones which you've only got 1 table first. You'll see why in a minute. Then how many tables have you got in your multi-table table spaces? This is again harking back to the DS max that we spoke about just now, or I spoke about just now. Then we have the Brf table partitions. The TS type can't be a lob, but if the format, the table partition format is blank, this is telling you that it's the basic row format. Yeah? And these ones have got to be migrated quickly. You don't want any BRFs. You've got to go to RFs as soon as you can. Now, also, Hammer ones, 6-byte RBA. You find that out by if the RBA format of the table partition is blank or B. Just in case you're wondering, the values are actually blank means it hasn't been touched since DB2 new function mode. So if you started with DB2 and you've been migrating over the years, you could still have some which are blank. If it's a B, it means it's basic, so it's 6-byte. It could be an E, which means it's extended, so that's 10 bytes. In other words, that's good. We don't want to even report that because we know it's fine. The other value that you can have is U for unknown. Now, that normally means the object is actually a defined no. Yeah, so defined no doesn't have a physical vSAM cluster behind it, and you can find them by looking at the TP or IP space column. If it's a -1, then you know that the object is actually defined no. And that also will raise its ugly head a little bit later in the presentation. And obviously, if the partition is 0, we're talking about a table space. And if the partition is not 0, we're talking about a table partition. For indexes, basically the same. Yeah, but here, of course, it's the IP RBA format, which is of interest. And so running these queries, you will get a nice list of all the bad guys coming up. Now we have one which is a bit strange. This is non-SMS volume usage. Now, I don't know anyone that isn't using SMS at DB2. In fact, in DB210, you had to have SMS for your storage groups. But you might still have some volumes in your sys volumes, which are not an asterisk or star. Really, you ought to think about getting rid of them. The use of the keyword volumes in create stow group was actually made optional way back in DB2 version 9. Yeah? Since then, you don't even have to use volumes because it's assuming that everything is going to SMS anyway. Yeah? And so this is just a quick check. As I say, not deprecated, but something that you should probably validate. And synonyms, one of my favorites, of course, is list out the synonyms. You should not have any of these guys. They've been nailed to their perch for years. They will die at some point, depending on how many you've got and how they're used. This could be a lot of work or not, and I will go into detail about that later in the presentation as well. And then the SQL External Procedures. Now, if you've ever tried looking at data in the sysIBM sysroutines, you'll know that trying to find an external procedure or a user-defined function or a system function, your sysroutine columns are always pretty tricky. You just have to believe what I've got here, that the routine type is P, so it's a procedure. The origin is ease, it's an external. Function type is blank, so it's not a proper function. And the language is SQL. And this will then return to you any and all of your SQL external procedures, which is deprecated, and I'll tell you how to fix it later as well.
Roy?
Yes.
I just break in with a comment here from Aurora. Segmented table spaces are required for work files if you want them to be DB2 managed, and I haven't heard of IBM changing that, doing anything to change that. Was the comment?
Yeah, it's a very good comment, but it's what I have here, I have half of my workspaces as PBGs, but I've still got some segmented as well. Naturally, we all know that trick, yeah, of setting the application compat lower to create the segmented spaces. My hope is that the work file databases will get some sort of fix, because at the moment they're in a bit of a mess. Yeah, you define it with a secondary quantity. If you don't want it to be used by DGTTs, you define it with 0 as a secondary quantity, so it tries to use that. You have to use segmented for certain items, and you can use PBG for other. It's really a bit of a mess. My hope is that IBM development will be coming out with a wonderful idea that will fix this for us.
I'm sure it'll be wonderful.
It will be wonderful. This sounds like a good aha idea, or at least a PMR non-defect. Yeah, to actually ask IBM, what are their plans? Because, of course, you know, we all know you can just set your application compatibility back to travel back in time, but that is not going to work in, say, DB214. I don't believe in DB214 you'll be able to set application compat 12503. That would be madness. I mean, I don't know what they're planning. Perhaps they are planning to support every single function level from now until the end of time. But I think it would be easier to actually get their work file definition sorted out. But a very good question, Aurora. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. You might have noticed in the queries I was saying, please do not tell me anything about the DB01, DBID1, that's the directory, of course, or DB06, DBID6, that's the catalog. Because even in DB212, the directory in the catalog still has simple table spaces. It still has multi-table table spaces. And it still, believe it or not, has 6-byte RBA defined no table partitions, which is quite sad. And so I decided to remove these from the checks for your table spaces because, of course, there's nothing you can do. We should not be fiddling around with the directory in the catalog. Quite right. If we were to change that, then IBM would probably tell us, are you mad? This is our software. It's like when you go to a vendor's database and just change all the table names. The software probably won't work. So that's why they've been removed. If you like, just for fun, when you're running the queries, you can comment out those and see how many deprecated items DB2 actually has itself. And what I found interesting is this entire thing, there's a bit of freeware I've done. You can go to our website, www.segas.com, and I've got some freeware there called the Migration Health Check. And we sent that out to a few of our customers to trial it, make sure it was working with live data and stuff. We always ask a couple of our friendly customers if they can pre-run stuff. They did all this, and then 8 weeks later, suddenly came this APAR to fix a whole bunch of problems with deprecated items in the DB212 catalog. Now, it could be coincidence, or it could be that the customers, because of course the first version of the software which was delivered listed out everything, including the directory of the catalog. I like to think that the customers complained to IBM and they actually fixed it. I don't know whether that's true or not, but I like to think it's true. So we've got this little tool, Migration Health Check. As I mentioned, go to the website. You can register to access. We need, if you want it to run for a year at your site, it's free. There's no worries. You just have to do this display m equals CPU command, so we can generate a password for it. Sadly, we've had consultants in the past who've taken our freeware software and just run it forever, saying it's their own. So now we always limit it to run for a year or so. There's even a buyable version which generates all of the alters which you need to actually create all your deprecated features. But that actually costs money. Most people are very happy just seeing what they have for a problem or seeing that they fixed everything themselves. Yeah? The important thing is to run it, make sure everything you have is fine. When you run it, you see something like this. Yeah, it's a very simple batch output that just spits out basically KPIs of your system. And I highlight, as I mentioned at the top here, with 3 asterisks, anything on here which is a deprecated feature. So if you run this software and you get no asterisks anywhere in the columns, then you're green. Then everything's fine. You have no worries whatsoever, and you are a Martian, because of course no one should ever have that. So here, this is running on one of my little test systems here. It's running at 5.5. And you can see I've got a few partition classics. I've got segmented. I've still got simples. You have to bear in mind we're a vendor firm, and so we have to be able to handle our customers' data, and customers have loads of partitions and segmented and simples. So I cannot actually migrate my own deprecated items, or I have no test data, which is quite sad, but it's the way of the world. Then we list out large empties, BRFs, number of multiple table spaces, and then the count of how many within for the DS max. Then I just list out a bunch of table counts. What have you got in your database? Sometimes it's interesting to know. Then I list out at the bottom here the number of synonyms that you have. Hopefully that should be approaching 0. Then in the latest 1.3 release, we've got the procedures. So I decode and write out everything about your sysroutines. And then here you can see we've got 1 SQL external, which isn't bad. Then the index data comes out, and here, number of partitioned indexes. Have you got any hash? We don't have the hash anymore. I got rid of them years ago, because none of our customers have any hash stuff. And then the table partitions and index partitions. You can see here it's running version 12 system that was actually installed at 12. So everything is running 10 bytes. Yeah, that's why the counters here with the 6-byte RBA less than 11 new function mode are at 0, and the basic are at 0. When you run this, I would hope to see that you have different data. And the define no number should always match the unknown. And you can see here, in my case, it doesn't. Now, this implies there's something horribly wrong in the catalog. In this case, what it is it's a fake widow. I've actually illegally deleted a row from the catalog so that I can actually get an error case with our software. Yeah? So this is actually something I have created for my firm, for my test. I am allowed to update the catalog here. You guys should not be touching the catalog unless you're doing normal commands. Then finally, I just list out how many storage groups you've got, and then from those storage groups, how many non-SMS volumes are in there. Yeah? And then just interesting data, number of plans, packages, statements. Yeah? Just so you can see on your system, wow, I didn't realize I had so many plans, packages, and SQLs. Yeah? And this is just data that you can run and file away. Now, what it also does in the free version that you can all get is it outputs a list of everything it finds. So I list all the empty databases, all the classic partitions, all the synonyms, which dependencies those synonyms have. So, because we're going to go into that in a bit of detail later, why that's important. which storage groups, and anything that you've just seen gets listed out. Yeah, multi-table table spaces, you name it, it's there. And so you can work out from this the work that you have to do. And if you've got the paid licensed version, you actually get a list looking like this, which is all of the alters that do everything for you. Now, I mentioned in the documentation exactly how you can do this all yourself from the software. So you can get the documentation, it's also for free. If you pay us, you get it generated for you, saves you a bit of time. But the one thing I do mention in the documentation, and I will mention it now, is when I generate 6,000 alters, do not even think about running them within one job. Yeah? Please don't do that. What you should do is pick out and do all the databases in one go. Pick out all of the synonyms, do them in one go. Don't do everything in one huge job. That's a very bad idea, because don't forget, a lot of these alters are going to kick stuff into advisory real pending, and you don't want problems happening with your syspending DDL. Yeah, so you've got to have this, you've got to look at this, and you've got to think about it in your head. How do you want to do this? How do you want to plan this? How do you want to execute this? That is not controlled by our software. Yeah, sadly, the carbon has to think about it. The silicon can't. So now we've seen how you find them all. You can either do it manually yourself with the SQLs that you've seen. You can do it with a program you can get for free from our software site. How now do you fix them? Obviously, you can pay our software and then you get it fixed for you for free. Or you could just follow what I'm going to show you now. Empty database, you drop it. Not difficult, yeah? Empty table space, you drop it. Not difficult. Hash organized, that's a little bit different. You have to drop organization. And the one problem with that is it throws away the hash index, which you might have been using. So what it tells you is to say, if you're dropping the organization, you will almost certainly need a new index. Yeah? So classic index-based partitioning. How can you get from A to B without causing an outage? All of this runs without causing an outage. That's the joy of it. Two-stage fix for your index space. First, the clustering index, which is the index that's output, is altered to be non-clustering, and then it's altered straight away back within the same commit scope to be clustering. Poof! You've now gone from index-based to table-based. That's it. No outage, instant change. Mwah! Works like a dream. I've done it loads of times. Now, you've got to flip it up into a UTS PBR, and you do that by just altering the table space, not the index this time, the table space, to give it a seg size. As default, I always give it a seg size 64. The way I look at it, anyone who's got a partitioned object, seg size 64 is the smallest number it should be. And that, of course, puts everything, that table space is then in advisory reorg pending. Everything's ready to roll. You run a reorg on it, share level change, and tra-la, you've actioned it. And it's been available the entire time, apart from the final log iteration right at the very end of the chain.
Roy, I've got a question from Chuck, and the question is, I hope I'm going to make sense when I say this. When do you recommend assigning max partition greater than 1? When would that have been a good idea?
Yeah, I mean, all I can say is our software that we sell, we put max partition 32.
Okay.
The real nasty problem with max partitions, and I've got a hard idea, what used to be an RFE, is when you change a max partition to go higher. Yeah, so when you've got max partitions 1 and you start running out of space, and you say, oh, I'll just alter max partitions 2, it invalidates all packages. Now, I find that unacceptable. Yeah, yeah. I found it unbelievable when I discovered it. I thought, that can't be, but it's documented, it's working as designed. I've spoken with a couple of the IBM lab guys in the optimization department. They said, yeah, it's because of parallel access. Yeah. If the access plan has been done with 1 partition, or say with 5 partitions, and it knows that at bind time, it can go to 5 separate parallel accesses at the partition level. And I said, oh yeah, that's okay. I can understand that. But if I'm at 64 partitions and I go to 66, you're not telling me that there's 64 parallel access threads going then to 66. I never got an answer. So I'm pretty sure that there is an argument for when parallel access is happening. But I don't know any firm, I do, I know a couple, I must admit, who do use parallel access, but most customers hate parallel access, and on a PBG, by definition, you only have an MPI. Why would you ever be using parallel access? So you can go to the AHA database, find my PBG alter, please vote for it, but I would never, ever, ever really start with max parts 1 on anything where you think at some point in the future you'll have to go to 2, 3, 4, 5. The converse of that, there's always two sides to a story, is never, ever, ever put max partitions 4096. Because what DB2 does by binding an access to an object and in the DBD is it has to get enough memory to handle all the possible partitions that could suddenly appear. And so in other words, there's a huge amount of memory which is allocated when you say max parts 4096, which is never used. And that causes you grief. Major problem. There are loads of APARs when PBGs first came out. So what I do at my firm is I set max partitions 32, which I think is a nice middle ground.
Yes. That
gives you loads of space. And if you think about it, why 32? If you think about it, it's a normal, good old-fashioned segmented data set, had a DS size of 2 gigs, and you could have 32 data sets. So I put 32. I'd say, okay, go to the default 2 gigs with 32, then you have the same amount of space that you can get today. But good question. Basically, there's no real good answer, but I would say 6 is probably more than good enough. We go for 32. I wouldn't go for more than that. Okay?
Thanks.
Super. Good question. Another good one. That's very good. So as we've been talking about, again, the table-based partitioning is just like the second part of the index-based partitioning, just putting a seg size to it. And then going to the question we just had, really, altering a table space to max partitions 1, that changes the simple or segmented with a single table, remember, don't even think about doing this if it's got more than one table, we'll then change it automatically into a PBG. Okay, as I mentioned here, for multi-table table spaces, either you got to do it yourself, you got to move everything out one table at a time, or you wait until FL508 is available at your site. FL508 enables you to automatically, through reorg magic, farm out all of your tables into their own table spaces. So, Brf table partitions. What can you do with a Brf table partition? You have to reorg it. Simple as that. 6-byte RBA index or table partitions. The fix is also a reorg. So in other words, one reorg fixes these two problems. The only thing that you have to check is that you haven't got RBA LRSN conversion switched off as the parameter or as the default. And by the BRF conversion, you have to make sure you either run it with row format RRF, which says change it from BRF to RF, of course, or your ZPARM is set to RF enable, or you're at a level of DB2 where both of these, the row format and the ZPARM, have disappeared. If they've disappeared, then you have no choice. When you do a reorg, it's going to go RRF. You can't even decide not to anymore. But if you're running version 11, you still have the choice, probably. Yeah? So that's why a reorg is a very good idea. Here we come back to what I mentioned about define no. Now this is a nasty, nasty problem. The only way you can fix these issues with define no is a drop and create. Yeah, now that fixes the problem. But remember, even if it's define no, it can be referenced by SQL. Yeah? Doing a select from a define no table just means you don't find anything. Yeah, it doesn't instantiate the table space. It doesn't instantiate the index space. It just says nothing found. You get a plus 100 straight away. You, however, drop that table space or index and recreate it, you will invalidate that package. Yeah? So you have to make sure before you go running around and dropping and recreating all of your define no stuff, just make sure your dependencies are checked and you keep a backup of them. Yeah? So you can then do your rebinds afterwards. Last one here, stow group with non-SMS vol ID. If you've got any of these ones, alter stow group, blah, 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 remove volumes, whatever. Get rid of those non-SMS volumes. They shouldn't be there anymore. They're probably not causing trouble, but it could be awkward if you accidentally use a store group that's got a volume ID hard-coded, which you shouldn't be using. Then people tend to jump up and down in the store group. So now we come to synonyms. This is a bit tricky. I say here a multimodal approach. What I mean is you run 2 queries, but multimodal sounded better. The thing about synonyms is the first thing you got to do is you got to work out the dependency checks. So I've got a little query here over a couple of pages, and that query just shows you from the sys-IBM sys-dependencies for your schema name synonym what things are dependent upon it. Because when you drop that schema, obviously anything that's dependent on it is gone. Yeah, so those views, those column masks will disappear. So my hope is that when you run this query for your schemas, you will not see any of these dependencies. That would be really cool. The second query is then looking at the package dependencies. Yeah, so then I list out just what that is for a package. Yeah, so I've got here just doing a case on the D type, reserved for IBM use. I hope you don't have any of those. But you get your compiled SQL, native SQL packages, not a trigger or native, which is the most common one. So it's just a program. Advanced triggers, obviously relatively new. And here I just pull out everything from sysbackdep. And all of these will require at least a rebind. Yeah, because obviously the synonym's gone, so it's going to be made marked invalid. You've got to do at least a rebind. That gives you 2 sets of work to do. You've got to make sure the dependent objects, you've got the DDL, you've got everything ready to roll, you've got your list of packages that you have to rebind, you then throw away the synonym, recreate your alias, and then off you go. So, finally comes to fix. How do you actually do all this? First, you have to set current SQL ID to the synonym schema. Remember, synonyms are evil. They are only single part names. There's no such thing as a schema name for a synonym, really. Yeah, you have to set the current SQL ID to be the schema name of the synonym. Then you can drop the beast. It's gone. Then you can just create the alias, because obviously alias is the replacement. Yeah. Then everything's fine. You've got rid of the synonym. You can now recreate any of the dependent objects. You can then rebind any of the dependent packages. The problem that you still have, and I have no solution, is the grants. Because the way a grant on a synonym works is so stupid. It is not done on the synonym. It's done on the table underneath the synonym, which of course is still there. Yeah? But the grant on the table doesn't work on the alias. So you have to do a little bit of fiddling around with grant and expect a few 551s. I don't know any other solution. But a few 551s is not much to pay for getting rid of all the synonyms, which will cause grief at some point. So now we have procedures, external SQL, deprecated in version 11. First thing you've got to do is extract your create procedure syntax. Complete procedure syntax. You need all of it. Then you need to extract any grants based on that procedure. And then comes the work. You have to drop the procedure. No way around it. Throw it away. Get rid of it. Then you have to edit your procedure syntax. You have to remove the keywords fence and or external. That's how it keys it into being an external SQL, of course. And if you're using the WLM environment keyword, you either delete it or you add for debug mode at the end. Yeah, those are the changes you have to do. And there's one more thing, as Steve Jobs used to say. And this is a bit nastier. You then have to check the code. I know it's ugly, but you have to. Because if you have any unqualified names in there, it gets really stupid. Again, I don't know why. If I meet the developer in the dark alley, I'll probably ask them a few questions why they did this. But I've written it down here. In an external SQL procedure, DB2 first matches variables or parameters to unqualified names, and then it goes and sees if it's a column name. Whereas in native SQL, it does it the other way around, which means your procedure might generate and create really well, but will be looking at the wrong value, which of course is not good. That means you've got to check it. You've got to hope, and I really do hope, that you have good coders. I know that's an anachronism these days. I hope you have good coders who use qualified names. I try and tell all of my coders here, always use qualified names. You never know when a new column name is going to appear in a new table and it's going to bite you. Always do it. But of course, I bet you some of you don't have it. So this is a little bit horrible. This is where you've just got to check all the names in the procedure. Once you've done that, you validated that, then you simply create the procedure, grant the permissions back, and then the final thing, the icing on the cake, if you like, is you have to probably, or even possibly, adjust the time parameter in the JCL. Because the externals, of course, they were all charged for CPU and everything else to the workload manager address space, the WLM, not to the batch user that submitted the job. When you're now doing native, of course, it's charged to the user. So if you have a time card on your JCL, which would say, I don't know, 2-3 seconds, you might now need to increase that. Otherwise, you might get 522s. Yeah, very unlikely, but it's important as that is a change in the way the system works and how it charges back. I think it's important to know. And so now you'll be very glad to know, after 45 minutes of me waffling away, we've arrived at questions and answers. Do we have any questions and answers?
Well, do you have the answers? We could make up some questions, I guess.
I've still got a couple of things I forgot to mention, actually. One thing which is important is when you're in version 12 at FL508, there's been a bit of chatter today in listserv and about that. And there's always some misunderstandings. You've got two choices if you want to go back to 504. Number one is you just spoofy a package at 503, and it's then your emergency spoofy, which works fine, of course. Or you can just do a set current application compatibility equal v12r1m503. Works fine.
Right.
The problem is, and I found it quite good, I've been typing set current application compatibility equals lots and lots of times for testing. And then I noticed there's a great aha idea. DB2 for ZOS 1194 from the Manu Life, from Brian Lauber. Mm-hmm. And he said, is it possible to get a simile so that I could just type Apple Compat instead of set current application compatibility? And I think it's a brilliant idea. And he justifies it very well because Apple Compat is actually the name used in the ZPARM. It's the name used in the bind and rebind. Why, please, Lord, is it not the set command? Yeah, so that's from me to the community out there. Vote for that. I don't see that being a massive change for DB2 development, but it would save my fingers from bleeding.
Yes, it's rather. It's Brian's actually on the call as well as, and he says he used to be bothered by catalog names that were plural, like systables and sysindexes, when you consider that the relational standard is normally for singular object names.
Yeah.
But that's the joy of the DB2 catalog. There's such and the word name, the column name of name varies depending on which table you're in when you're in the DB2 ZOS catalog, as opposed to the LUW catalog, which has come up with standard views on top, which for some reason the mainframe has never bothered to do. There's another pet peeve for you.
Yeah, but after 20 years, you're used to saying, damn, no, it's not TB creator, it's creator in that table.
You can spell application compatibility correctly anyway. It's like there's a province in Canada that's never been spelled correctly, and it's called Saskatchewan. We don't know how.
Oh, God, yeah.
And another comment from Gary, it says Roy for president, so.
And the final point for me from the whole thing, especially with Apple Compat, as we're talking about that, is if you do have, you want to change the Apple Compat and you want to do it with a rebind, you just use the Apple Compat keyword and everything's fine. But it does not work for SQL procedures. I don't know why it doesn't work. What you got to do is you have to use the replace syntax, and then you can put the Apple Compat on the replace syntax, and then it works. But you can't do it with a rebind. Everything else works fine with Apple Compat, but native SQL procedures not allowed. Yeah, so it's a little heads up. So there's little things you just have to remember. If you ever want to do that, you've got to use the replace instead of a rebind.
Yes, indeed. Indeed. All right. Well, thanks for a very entertaining and delightful show today, as always, Roy. It's a pleasure to have you on. And I'm just going to do the final housekeeping here of asking our final poll question, which is, did you learn anything today? And we're expecting our normal great response on this. And surprise, surprise, we're getting great numbers on that. So, and we'll just close that off and share the results. 97% of the audience learned something, which is pretty good. There's always somebody out there that knows everything, and I'm not that person anymore. I used to pretend to be.
I gave up thinking I knew everything about DB2 many years ago. I've been working with it for over 30 years, but there's still so much I don't know.
I started teaching DB2 classes as a quote expert in 1987.
I've just been using it for 2 years at that point.
I was at that point. I started working with it in '85, but by '87, if you could say anything that people wanted to hear, I could put 25 people in the classroom back in '87 and '88, and people came away with generally nice thoughts of me, and that's why I'm still around. But this is a great show, and thanks so much for doing it. And
okay. Always my pleasure being on the show and talking to everyone. And you, Martin.
And we'll have you back soon. And with that,
sure.
I'll cue the music, say my final thank yous all over again and again and again. Wish everybody a great weekend. Hope everybody's staying well and staying safe through this very strange period of human history. And hopefully we'll all be able to get back together in person again in the near future.
I sincerely hope so. I'll buy you all a beer.
Oh, we're looking forward to that too. I still like beer. One thing about it is still drinking beer.
Very good.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Bye.
We'll see you all again on the night show. Bye-bye.